Premonitions. Appearing in dreams, they more often than not foreshadow a coming tragedy. For those who can see the future, their dreams burn, warning them of impending disaster. If you are yet to watch my other Premonition Stories video, be sure to do so after this. But for now, here are 2 more chilling, real subscriber-submitted Premonition stories. Enjoy. About 3 years ago, I experienced 2 premonitions, both told of horrendous tragedies and came to me in the form of dreams. Initially, I shook them off as nightmares. However, this immediately evaporated once I had discovered that the events in my dreams came to pass. It was March 2014. I dreamt that I was on a plane. When the craft took off, it was nighttime. From where I sat in a window seat, I could see that the plane was a wide-body aeroplane. I didn't know where we were heading. As everyone settled down into the flight, I watched as the cabin crew began to serve meals and drinks. Suddenly, the plane turned violently. Immediately, there were screams of panic on board. The plane started to roll 360 degrees before plunging down at an incredible speed. We were falling out of the sky. As the aircraft plunged, it broke up. Even now, I can clearly remember the sensation of still being strapped to my seat as I crashed onto an island. All around me, pieces of debris fell from the sky, colliding with the beach and dropping into the sea. Above me was the sun, already in the middle of the sky when the plane crashed. I woke up. It was 8:19 a.m. and I struggled to shake the nightmarish contents of my dream. I jokingly thought, what if a plane had actually crashed? After that, I went to prepare for my day. It was a weekend. I went to my computer and opened Facebook. It was then that I saw it. The very first thing on my newsfeed, Malaysia Airlines has lost contact with flight MH370. The following year, debris from the craft was discovered on a beach on Reunion, an island in the Western Indian Ocean. However, my premonition did not end there. Around the end of April, I dreamt about another plane crash. This time, I was on the ground. Overhead, I watched as an aeroplane nosedived into the earth, crashed, and then exploded in a ball of flames. A news headline screamed, "Malaysia Airlines crash, 295 killed." After this second dream, I could not shake the feeling that a great tragedy would yet again befall Malaysia Airlines. Over the following weeks, the airline was struck by problems, including an emergency landing and malfunctions with the aircraft. However, deep down, I knew that these problems were not the only ones the airline would face. From my dreams, I knew that a Malaysia Airlines aeroplane was going to crash again. On the 17th of July 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 was shot down over the Ukraine, killing 298 people. I now believe that I have the gift to foresee tragic events in my dreams, and it haunts me to this day. This story takes place over the span of about 5 years, beginning back in 1999 during my second year of middle school and ending near my 18th birthday. Before I begin, I'd like to apologize for the length of this story, as it really means a lot to me, and I feel that I need to spend some time explaining all of the details. Now, I've never been one to believe in ghosts and spirits and all that. Even now, I find it very hard to place my trust in the supposed paranormal encounters that I hear from time to time. However, these events that I'm about to share changed my life forever, and I will never think about life and death the same way again. The story starts when I was 12 years old and attending 7th grade in Black Forest, Colorado. I didn't have many friends at the time because I was new to the area and I was also a bit shy. I honestly can't recall who I was friends with back then. However, I remember very clearly the day that I met her. She was a tall blonde girl who always had this sad and confused look in her eyes. Her name was Allie. I had seen her around the school before, and I knew that there was something a little off about her, like she had some kind of mental disability or something. Whenever I saw her, she was always sitting somewhere by herself while drawing in her notebook. People used to make fun of her every now and then because she was so quiet, like she literally never spoke a word to anyone, ever. I actually thought that she might have been mute. It wasn't until about halfway through the 2nd semester when I finally met her. I noticed her standing near the school entrance, clutching her notebooks tightly to her chest and looking as though she was about to cry. A few kids were holding up a picture that she had drawn, waving it around in the air while taunting her, with nothing better to do than humiliate this poor girl. I decided to intervene because I was so disgusted with how cruel those kids were being to her. I quickly walked up from behind and snatched the drawing with one hand while grabbing Allie's hand and pulling her away with the other. I gave little concern to the bullies, cursing me from behind, and we kept walking hand in hand for a few seconds before I pulled her aside and handed her the drawing. "You really need to stand up for yourself," I said. "Next time you should just walk away from them. Like seriously, don't even pay attention to those jerks, okay?" She didn't seem to acknowledge any of my words. Her eyes were fixed on her crumpled up drawing. "I can walk you home if you like." Allie pursed her lips for a moment before she finally shifted her gaze towards me. We looked at each other for a few seconds, and then she smiled softly and nodded her head. I tried to make small talk with her on the way over to her house, but she only ever made subtle facial expressions and nodded her head in response. It was a bit awkward, to be honest, but I felt really bad for her, and I just wanted someone to treat her like a human being for once. I don't think she realized how pretty she was, and I kept wondering about what could have led her to have such a poor self-image. After about 20 minutes or so, we both arrived in front of her house. Immediately, I got a very creepy vibe from the place. I could tell that Allie didn't like the house either, as she seemed slightly hesitant to open the rusted black gate that separated the overgrown yard from the sidewalk. She carefully walked up to the front door and stalled for a bit before walking inside. Then she turned around and waved at me as she closed the door behind her. I really didn't want to hang around near that house any longer, so I continued to jog down the road to my house a little faster than usual. The next day, I sat alone on the bleachers after school and watched the soccer team practice for a while. Half an hour or so had passed since I sat down when I thought I heard footsteps coming from behind me, so I turned around to see who else had nothing better to do than watch the junior high soccer team practice. To my surprise, it was Allie. She smiled at me when she saw that I noticed her, and she continued to walk down the aisle towards where I was sitting. She sat down next to me and then looked out at the field. "I've always enjoyed watching sports, although I never seem to understand them," she said softly. Obviously, I was a bit bewildered when she said this. Here, I had thought that she wasn't able to speak. I must have been the first person at the school that she had ever spoken to. I was about to make some kind of remark about her finally talking, but I thought I'd better not as I didn't want to offend her. "Yeah, me too. Soccer is the only sport where I really feel like I know what's going on," I replied. It took me a few too many seconds before I thought of something else to say. "You seem to really like drawing," I remarked. She blushed a little when I said that. "My mom taught me how to draw." "Was your mom an artist?" I asked. "I think so," she replied. "I didn't know her very well. She passed away a long time ago." "I'm sorry. My mom also died a while back." She seemed to open up a lot more after I said that. Eventually, she told me about how she had been living alone with her father for most of her life. She kept telling me that he was a mean man, and he would often punish her for the smallest of mistakes. She mentioned that her dad once forcefully held her hand in boiling water because she knocked over a bowl of soup by accident. He also blamed her for every time he had a bad day at work. After hearing this, I started to feel sick. I couldn't believe what she was telling me. She was such a sweet person. She sure as hell didn't deserve to be treated like trash by everyone, including her own father. After about 15 minutes into our conversation, the sun broke free from behind the clouds, and Ali started to take off her jacket. When she did this, I caught a glimpse of several pink ribbon scars along her forearm. I felt my heart sink after seeing this. I was uncertain as to what I should say, but I eventually just asked if she wanted to hang out after school sometime. She seemed unsure at first, but let out a slight smile and agreed. Sometime later that week, Ali came over to my house and insisted that we watch 10 Things I Hate About You together. We both had a pretty good time and she seemed really happy. I remember us playing foosball for a while, and at one point I somehow managed to hit the ball upwards and into the ceiling fan, which sent it sailing across the room like a rocket before crash landing inside my fishbowl. That was the first time I had ever heard her laugh, and I'll never forget that sound. After that, Ali and I became close friends. We would walk to school together, eat lunch together, and after school we would often go exploring in the woods behind my house. Despite her seeming really happy and full of life while she was with me, I could always tell that she was hiding something. I could sense that she was slowly falling apart underneath the mask that she wore when I was around. She never wanted to go back home after school, and sometimes she would come over to my house late at night because she was afraid of her dad. I remember us talking about how we were going to run away and never come back. She was like a sister to me, and I felt like I had to do everything that I could to protect her. I really wanted her to live the peaceful life that I knew she truly deserved, and I felt that if I didn't look after her, no one else would. As time went on though, we started to see each other less and less. Ali ended up going to a different high school than me, and I moved 20 minutes or so outside of town, so she couldn't walk to my house anymore. I started to get caught up in some unfortunate things that were going on in my life. I sort of drifted off from reality for a while. My dad and stepmom got a divorce shortly after I turned 16, and as a result, I became a bit of an alcoholic. I soon fell into a rather serious depression, and I stopped talking to many of my friends. I only saw Ali once, maybe every few months at this point. Eventually, my junior year of high school came around, and this was about the time that I started to have these really weird dreams, which I now believe have some sort of spiritual meaning. Keep in mind that I'm really not much of a religious person. This all happened over 12 years ago, but I can clearly recall almost every detail in my mind. The first dream happened one night after I had practically drank myself to sleep. I found myself standing upside down in a nearly pitch-black forest somewhere. It was like the whole world had been flipped and gravity was somehow reversed. I looked all around and saw nothing but a dense overgrowth of intertwining branches and leaves. The place was oddly familiar, and I felt like I had been there before, although I could not quite put my finger on it. I noticed an old rope swing tied to a tree that was swaying back and forth in the breeze. It was hanging upside down and pointed towards the vacant night sky. When I saw this, it felt as though something had just punched me in the gut, like I had just been electrocuted. I then heard a loud ringing sound in my ears and began to discern a very tall figure about 10 yards ahead of me in the woods. Whatever this thing was, it must have stood roughly 40 or so feet high, as it was towering above the trees. The entity was incredibly thin, probably only a foot or two wide. It blended in perfectly with the dense foliage, and if it were not for its haunting white eyes which illuminated part of the forest canopy, it would have easily been mistaken for a tree. I was suddenly overwhelmed with an enormous feeling of sadness and heartbreak, the likes of which I've never felt before. I felt myself fall to my knees, and my vision became very blurry with tears. This tall black creature then bent down so that its face was only a few feet from mine. The only feature I could make out on this thing were its eyes, which were blindingly bright at this point. I don't remember being afraid of this thing, and I got the impression that it felt sympathy for me. Without opening its mouth, it began to speak in this soft, calm voice. It said, "I'm here, you're not." My chest began to sting as it spoke, and again it repeated the sentence, "I'm here, you're not." It said the same thing 5 or 6 more times before its eyes suddenly started to shimmer with red and blue light. The light grew brighter and brighter until all I could see were the colors red and blue. And then I woke up. Only a couple of seconds after I awoke, I was immediately startled by my alarm going off, which was set for 7:30 a.m. I reached over and turned off my alarm, and then sat up in my bed, confused, trying to make sense of what had just happened. What was that supposed to mean? I thought to myself. I realized that the horrible feeling of grief that I had just felt moments ago was now nowhere to be found, yet I remembered it very clearly. It just felt like a normal dream. The feeling was gone, and I wasn't really all that shaken up by the whole thing. Still, something didn't feel quite normal about that dream. Puzzled, I got up out of bed and carried on with my day. About 2 weeks had passed after that, and the dream I had earlier was hardly ever on my mind anymore. I fell asleep one night on the couch while watching a movie, and once again found myself in the same dream world as before. Although this time there was something different. The forest was burning bright with fire, and I could feel the heat coming from all around me. I looked around me to see if I could find that creature again, and sure enough there it was, standing high above the treetops. I was immediately overwhelmed with that same painful sense of sadness that I had felt in my previous dream. This time I collapsed completely onto the wet ground beneath me. The dark figure then knelt down beside me and came very close to my face when it spoke in that same calm voice. However, this time it sounded a little more urgent than before. It spoke to me softly, quickly chanting the following phrase as if it did not have much time. "Find me here, I'll be sleeping." It rapidly said the same thing several times before its eyes began to flash red and blue once again. I woke up in the same fashion as the first dream, and shortly afterwards I could hear my alarm go off in the other room. This seemed strange to me because that meant that I had woken up at the exact same time as my last dream. The thought of this frightened me a little bit, but I still wasn't sure what the message I heard in my dream meant, if anything. I realized that this second dream was a lot shorter than the first one, like it had been sped up or something. As I did before, I continued on with my day, but this time I wasn't about to let the dreams go. I knew that there was something strange happening to me, and it wasn't just a dream like any other. I thought that there was surely going to be another dream like this sometime soon, so I patiently waited for my next experience. 2 months went by, and by now I was willing to let go of the bizarre dreams and forget that they ever happened. I was exhausted after a long and particularly awful day at school, and I fell asleep as soon as I got home. That's when I had the third dream, and this one was not like the others. This felt very real. I was already lying on the ground and crying when this dream began, and the creature spent no time bending over towards me as it was already knelt down beside me. It was as if this creature didn't want to waste any time and was abandoning the beginning of the dream. One other thing I noticed was that I was no longer hot from the surrounding fire. Instead, I was shivering from a biting cold, and the forest was covered in about a foot of snow. Without delaying, the eyes started to flash red and blue again as the creature spoke. only saying the phrase once this time. "Why did you wait? You'll know when you feel it." I felt an electric shock race throughout my body before I was jolted awake. The moment I opened my eyes, I knew something was very wrong. I could sense that something bad was about to happen, and I didn't know how, but it felt like someone was watching my every move. Not in a creepy way, but more like whatever was watching me knew what was about to happen next, as if they had already seen it before. It didn't feel threatening to me. It felt sort of sad, like it felt deep empathy for me and wanted to comfort me, but didn't know how. It's hard to explain what I was feeling. It just all felt so clear in that moment. I was absolutely certain that something terrible was going to happen, but any attempt I might make to stop it from happening was hopeless. My shaking hand instinctively reached over to grab my phone for some sort of quick comfort. I noticed that it was 7:30 p.m. I then saw that I had 11 missed calls, so I checked my call history fearing the worst. I got a nauseating feeling in my stomach. It was Ali. She had called me 11 times whilst I was asleep. I didn't even bother to call her back. Instead, I threw off my covers and hurried downstairs and into the garage. I quickly hopped on my bike and headed out into the night. I remember praying desperately to God that everything would be okay as I rode towards Ali's house. The whole way there, I continued to feel as though someone was watching over me, pushing me to ride faster through the pouring rain and the dense fog. Finally, after an exhausting 2 hours of riding my bike, I entered my friend's neighborhood. As I was rounding the corner nearest to her house, I began to see the reflections of red and blue lights shimmering off the wet ground. I felt all of the life drain from my body as I caught my first glimpse of the house. Men in yellow reflective suits rushed through the old iron gate, breaking down the door whilst calling out Ali's name. My gaze then shifted towards Ali's father, who was yelling out profanities while being held down over the hood of a police car. A wave of heat swept over me as I approached. The house was entirely engulfed in fire, and I stared helplessly at the flames as they rose high into the cool night air. I suddenly lost all my strength, and my legs gave way beneath me. The realization that all this was really happening was slowly setting in. I felt the tears streaming down my face, and that's when I collapsed onto the ground. Eventually, one of the paramedics saw me laying there and came over to see what was wrong. I asked him if my friend was in there, but the man just shook his head and told me that he was sorry. I slowly handed the man my phone, and he called my stepmom for me. I think I sat there, broken-hearted, for at least an hour and a half, just watching the house as it burned to the ground, knowing that my friend was probably in there. My stepmother later came rushing up from behind before hugging me tightly. I tried to hold back my tears in front of my stepmom, but to no avail. She knew how much Ali had meant to me at one time, and she kept telling me how much she loved me. She continued to embrace me for a while longer before we finally headed back home. That night, I laid in bed staring at the ceiling until the sun came up. I managed to get some sleep around 8:30 a.m, but when I awoke, I knew that whatever was watching over me was gone. The feeling I had the night before had completely left without a trace. I remember feeling very alone. It didn't take long for the news of what really happened to get around town. Ali had done something to upset her dad. Something minor and insignificant, I imagined. Yet he, in all his stupidity and drunken rage, decided to lock Ali in her room. Meanwhile, he went back downstairs and began tearing the place up, a common tradition with Ali's dad. He started throwing chairs against the walls, smashing bottles, and even knocked over a large fake tree in the living room, which ignited the moment it made contact with the fireplace. Long story short, her father claims that he was not able to rescue Ali and still have enough time to escape from the house himself. They think that Ali had taken a bunch of pills to force herself to fall asleep, afraid to later confront her dad, meaning that she was likely unconscious during the fire. I don't know what became of her father. All I know is that he was arrested and no one ever saw him again. The only thing that mattered to me was that I had just lost my only true friend, forever. I truly cannot describe how horrible the feeling was once I learned what happened to Ali. I wanted to mourn for my friend right then and there, but somehow I had forgotten altogether how to cry. My mind just became detached from it all, and besides, life wasn't about to grant me a moment of mourning just yet. No, my friend's death was soon followed by the death of my cousin, whom I was very close with. He had taken his own life after a painful 11-year battle with bipolar disorder and depression. My stepmom also passed away from cancer the following year. It was just one of those times where everything feels so surreal that your mind keeps trying to convince you that it was all a dream. Such an awful feeling, one which is much worse than any fear or pain that I've ever experienced. I didn't feel like I could bear it forever, and at that point I truly did not want to live anymore. Eventually, I started having these dreams, after my stepmother had passed, of a dark hole. I couldn't see anything, but I could tell that I was falling. I was afraid to stop myself, yet the longer I fell, the more scared I became. I couldn't take it anymore. I really wanted to die. But there was that feeling again. Someone was watching over me, but this time it didn't feel sad. It was as if it was letting me know that I was safe. I would then suddenly feel myself laying down, with sunlight beaming down on my face, although I still could not see anything. I would always wake up shortly after this, alone in my room once again. The world didn't stop to wait for me while I was falling to pieces. Everyone was moving on without me, but I learned to enjoy the feeling of being left behind, because it was a strangely comforting feeling that made it easier to fade away from reality. However, I didn't fade away like everyone else did at the time. I probably would have though, and I would likely not be here today if I was left alone much longer. But something happened that changed my life forever. Something that reminds me that we are never truly alone, no matter how painfully alone we may feel at times. I had one final dream, about a month before my 18th birthday, which makes me smile every time I think about it. I remember being on all fours, struggling to push back on an immense force that was trying to bury me into the ground. I was calling out for help, but no one was around to hear my trembling voice. I tried so hard and for so long to keep this force at bay, but finally I realized that I could not win this battle. I surrendered to the feeling and let myself fall onto the ground. The cold dirt began to swallow me whole, pulling me deep into the earth. I closed my eyes and sobbed softly as I breathed my last breath. I was no longer afraid, and I was ready to die. A sensation then gently washed over me, and my whole body began to tingle. Something eventually told me to open my eyes, and when I did, I was sitting on the edge of a pier, looking out at this beautiful orange sky. After a few moments, I turned to the left of me, and there she was, my sweetest friend. She smiled innocently as I looked right through her. No words were spoken. We just looked into each other's eyes and then gazed out at the sunset together. Ali used to sometimes tell me how much she wanted to go to the beach, yet she had never been, and now I was right there with her. I could hear the waves crashing against the supports underneath the pier, and I could feel the gentle breeze caress my cheek. This was by far the most beautiful moment I've ever experienced in my life. I felt a calming warmth in my chest, and I turned to tell Ali that I loved her, but before I could speak, she leaned over and wrapped her arms around me. She held me so tightly, and I started to shed tears of joy, sadness, and confusion all at the same time. Finally, she spoke softly in my ear, in her sweet, familiar voice. She told me that it was time for her to go, and then she said something that has stayed with me in my mind ever since that day. We are always here, she said. "Close your eyes and we are there with you, always." When I opened my eyes, she was gone, and I sat there alone on the pier for a while longer, not really thinking about anything, until I awoke in my bedroom. And that was the end of it. I've never had anything strange like that happen to me since then, and I honestly don't think I ever will again. Whatever that creature was in the first 3 dreams, it was definitely not some kind of spiritual representation of my friend Ali. It was something else altogether. Maybe it was an angel of some sort. I don't think I'll ever know for sure, but it was more than just a figment of my imagination. It foreshadowed the worst year of my life, and it made predictions which later came true. I'm pretty clueless as to what its intentions were, but it didn't feel threatening in any way. This, whatever it was, had a deep connection with me. It felt sort of like a mother looking after her child. I like to believe that it was a guardian angel or something of the like, and it understood exactly what I was going through. As I said before, I am not a religious person. However, my gut feeling told me that whatever that being was is far beyond our human understanding. I believe that it came from whatever plane of existence is patiently waiting for us after this life. I have since moved to California, where I sometimes drive to the beach and head to the pier around sunset. It makes me feel closer to not only Ali, but also to all the others that I've lost over the years. When you lose someone who you truly love with all your heart, it forms a wound that can never truly heal. Sure, we all have to get on with our lives at some point, and memories of our loved ones inevitably begin to fade over time. But when you care about someone deeply, you form a powerful connection with that person, one that we often don't notice until they're gone. I know in my heart of hearts that this truly indescribable feeling is simply too strong to break, and not even death can silence the bond I have with those I've lost. We all have that one memory that burns, yet we can't seem to let go of it. This is mine, and it saved my life. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe for more of the paranormal. And if you have not done so already, please click the bell to ensure that you receive notifications for new videos. Remember, the more you know, the more there is to fear.